Good afternoon. Happy to be here in sunny Florida. Of course, I'm a Southerner, so not too far of a trip for me, but again, just happy to be here to share what I've learned a little bit about concrete pavement resilience. Again, this is a concrete pavement industry perspective. It's not obviously the ACI, it's not the FAA, but it is a concrete pavement industry perspective and something I've enjoyed learning more about. I go to the right. There we go. So I couldn't find a FAA definition for resilience, but I did find a FHWA one. And it's the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions and withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruptions. So that's a lot of words, but I thought a graph like this would help show it better. So if you've got a pavement that's going along and obviously most likely it's deteriorating slightly, so it's probably not a straight line, and then you have some sort of event, there will be a drop of service. And so what resiliency is in terms of pavement is how far is the drop and how will it respond? Obviously, according to like this graph illustrates, if you've got a green pavement, one that's more resilient, it will come back quickly. If you have a blue pavement that's even like a hardened system, not only will it come back quickly, there are some things you could potentially do ahead of time to make sure it responds even more favorable than where you were to begin with as you do those repairs. And of course, your red pavement illustrates when you have an event, a weather event of some kind, some sort of a catastrophe, your pavement doesn't come back as far as where you started. So that's a pretty good little graph that kind of illustrates, again, helps illustrate resilience in terms of pavement. The drop of performance induced by the event and the ability to carry that load, and as well as the recovery time. So my outline today, now that we have the definition and hopefully a pretty good understanding what resilience in terms of pavement means, this is what I hope to cover. The why, the need, of course, for resilient airfield pavements. Why is it so important today versus, say, 10 years ago? How to design for resilience. What's the FAA doing today that maybe, again, wasn't being considered 5 years ago? And then I'm going to share a couple case studies to let you see how airports are already incorporating as they're rehabbing their pavements, how they're already incorporating resilience into their decisions. This picture here is of a GA airport in Eastern North Carolina after one of our severe weather events. I think it was back in 2018. We had over 3,000 roads that were closed at one time, and we had several airports that were closed, international airports, as well as GA airports. These airports for many communities is the lifeline to get supplies in. Roads were being cut off. So you needed that airport to bring in water, to bring in medical supplies. And obviously when your pavement's underwater, it's difficult to do that. So how's our climate conditions? How have they changed recently? This graph or this slide illustrates that very succinctly. It illustrates that based upon studies that our precipitation of our weather events are becoming far more intense. As you can see out here, by the late 21st century, we're expected to see a lot percentage change of severe weather, especially as you can see there up in the Northeast, out west. I think most of you in here have seen studies or read recent reports about what's happening with sea level rise. And again, obviously that's not impacting your airports in the middle of the country, but it is impacting our airports that are in close proximity to oceans. And again, not that I'm going to spend a lot of time, but some of our infrastructure is also being impacted by heat environments and drought. So most of my talk today is really going to be talking more along the lines of flood. Again, being from the Southeast, that tends to impact us more. This slide is from McKinsey and Company. It kind of illustrates for all the various transportation assets. There are certain types of shocks, risk that can be incurred by these various events. As you can see for airports, some of the more severe ones are your storms, your hurricanes, your intense rainfall events that causes flooding. A lot of our airports are now being impacted by that. So again, climate risk increases the operating costs for these airports, as well as exacerbates that funding shortfall that I'm sure most of y'all are well aware of. There's just not enough money to take care of our existing rehab, much less what's likely to occur in the future. So I mentioned sea level rise, and what's happening with sea level rise is due to our warming climate. We're seeing our melting ice at our two poles, of course, and just the nature with a warming climate, the particles get larger, and therefore the sea level comes up. So these are what's called king tides or sunny day floods. In other words, these floods are occurring without any additional rainfall, and we're seeing our infrastructure impacted. Here's in like Miami, Florida, where water is overtopping our roadways, and it may not be overtopping our airports because I don't exactly see that happening as much, but we're seeing increased groundwater rise. So a recent study I saw is in Charleston here. Just in 2019, we had 13 days of where water, due to just sea level rise, again, sunny day, rising tides, where our infrastructure was impacted in 2019. I think it was 20 years ago, just 20 years ago, we were experiencing only 2 days of this. So in that 20-year period, we're seeing an increase just due to sea level rise. And recent reports are showing 30 years from now, by 2052, we're going to see, again, potentially up to 60 days of our infrastructure being impacted, not by the rain, by our normal hurricanes and by intense storms, just strictly by the rising tides. And so something obviously will have to be done with our infrastructure if we want to continue to see it remain in good shape. Again, this is more pictures of where I live out in the Outer Banks. Just due to hurricane events, our runways are getting overtopped during these events, and then again, what I mentioned with that McKinsey slide, when it's not due to the ocean water coming over top of our water, we're seeing more and more river flooding due to increased rainwater events. And again, this is impacting middle of America. Many of our airports in the middle of the country is being impacted by this. So what's happening when water goes over top of our pavement is the pavement condition curves accelerate. Now I'll show you an example of that a little later. But and the reason why is the water that's either coming over top of the pavement, but also increasing coming up from the bottom. Studies are showing that subgrades, depending upon, of course, your subgrade material and stuff, but your subgrades can stay moist for over a year. People think, well, the water's gone, I'm fine. Let's get the air traffic back on the runway, and you do. I mean, you've got to get your airport back open. But what's happening? It's stressing many of these pavements because, again, those subgrade materials are wet. So you'll see here what's happened is there is a difference. I wanted to point out how pavements respond to subgrade moisture. And again, it's designed for it. FAA designs for this. So asphalt pavements are known to be flexible, right? Rigid pavements are known to be, concrete pavements are known to be rigid. So with an asphalt pavement with a given load, especially again, for a lot of these GA airports, general aviation, small airports, that asphalt thickness is not that thick. And most of the load is really carried into the base, is really carried by the base and subgrade materials. With concrete, which again is a more rigid system, it tends to spread that load out. You can see the shape of how that load is impacted down into the subgrade. Concrete tends, I mean, that's just the basic parameter of how concrete's designed. So the pressures on the subgrades are much lower. So you can imagine that again, the concrete's rigidity being able to spread that load over a weakened subgrade would be more favorable. So now we have a flooded condition. That's what this blue is showing around these pavements. What's happening is again, what I was talking about earlier, because these subgrades are taking a much longer time to get rid of that moisture, it's impacting that pavement life. The PCI curves are dropping faster on a airfield pavement that has been subject to flooding or high water tables versus a concrete pavement, because of its ability to maintain that stiffness and that strength. It may still be weak underneath, but as provided that it's uniform, we're not seeing the concrete's serviceability being impacted to the same degree. So there are ways, and that's what I wanted to get to, there are ways to improve an airfield pavement's resilience. It's kind of, again, not the why, but the how. And if you go back to that aging system, to that pavement, there's things that you can do, whether you're stiffening the system, whether you're using a particular rehab technique, there's things that you can do so that it's not dropping off as fast and that it's rebounding back or higher than where you started. And that's the goal. That's that adaptation part of the definition of resiliency that I started off with. If you can do things while you're doing that rehab so that when you do experience that next event, it won't have the same impact. You won't have the same drop of serviceability prior and after the event. So this is a pretty good example. Another airport in Eastern North Carolina, Rocky Mount Wilson. It's right along the I-95 corridor. You know, when you hear about hurricanes that come up the coastline, you always hear about, well, all that damage is happening right along the coast. Well, that's not true. A lot of that water is being thrown in 100 miles into the Midlands or into the Piedmont of North Carolina. And so it's really some of our interior airports that actually get impacted more by hurricane events than some of the coastal communities. I'm not saying the coastal communities don't have their flooding issues, but a lot of our interior Piedmont region airports start experiencing things like this, where you can see the staining of the materials coming up through the cracks of the asphalt and sometimes the concrete. So what you want to do, again, is address this with your rehab. So what's the FAA doing? And that's the reason why I wanted to show this chart. They just released a new design circular in June, and to illustrate why resiliency and how resiliency is becoming a larger play. If you look at their prior edition, the 6F versus the 6G, the term water inundation was not even mentioned in the 2016 circular. And now in 2021, you're seeing it mentioned 2 times. So they're stressing the importance as a consultant is again, trying to develop that appropriate rehab strategy. They're saying, hey, consider if that airport has been inundated with water. Although they've always used the term water table, you know, where's the water table below your pavement? That too is being a larger focus. With the new circular, you're seeing added discussion regarding the importance of subgrade stabilization. I'll share why they're emphasizing that. And there's a new technique out there that I just wanted to bring to light for those that may not be aware. There's a new technique that's in that FAA design that's called full depth reclamation, things that you can do to stabilize that base as you're rehabbing that pavement. So the subgrade stabilization, this is part of that design circular. Again, the latest circular, it now says under subgrade stabilization, this particular section, it's always said you consider subgrade stabilization if you have these following conditions. It's always had, the prior version had the poor drainage, the adverse surface drainage. What's new is this periodic water inundation. So that engineer that goes out and completes those field studies and looks at the history of that pavement now has to take into context that term water inundation. And it encourages you through this circular to do a stabilization of that subgrade material that used to, again, not be quite as emphasized in the older circular. So how do we improve the resilience of our airfield pavements? Again, these are all techniques that can be considered when the engineer goes out and does his evaluations. You can obviously stabilize that base through various specifications. The 207s, this is the one I just mentioned. The 304 and 306 and 307 have always been there, but again, these are just different ways of stabilizing your bases or providing a stabilized base under your P501, which is your concrete layer. This 307 is actually a drainage course, something that I didn't really see too much of in our southeastern area. And this picture is at a Air Force base in eastern Fayetteville, North Carolina, where they were using a cement stabilized drainage layer. But again, what we're seeing in this new circular is a little added emphasis to consider using those kind of materials to help move water in a positive direction. The other technique you'll hear me talk about a little bit is this concrete overlay strategy, and I'll go through that real quickly. So what does FDR do for you? It hardens your system. Again, comparing to an unstabilized material, it lowers those pressures right in your subgrade. That's what the full depth reclamation does. It minimizes, again, it doesn't totally eliminate it, but it does minimize that permeability action of water coming up from the bottom and affecting this top layer. So it's that capillary action that causes, your subgrade materials to get weaker. So that's the reason why we're seeing techniques like full depth reclamation being used more, especially for general aviation type airports. And this kind of shows the diagram of what full depth reclamation, for those that may not have ever seen it before. Here's the equipment that reclaims both your distressed asphalt pavement. It captures some of that base material underneath. And then you put a binder with it, typically cement, to make it harden. The CP Tech Center has a great bulletin on full depth reclamation that you can pull right from their website. And again, we're just seeing that rehab technique being used for general aviation airports. Those, again, not like the big commercial airports that Mark oversees, but the smaller airports, and there's thousands of them across the country. When that asphalt pavement begins to distress and need rehab, more and more consultants are looking toward this type of technique. And this kind of shows, again, when your asphalt surface is distressed, you go through and you reclaim it, you pulverize these materials. As you notice, you even capture a little subgrade in it. You come through and of course you grade it off because you're going to be putting a new surface in. And here is when you start injecting cement and water. This is all done through a geotech firm that usually designs this material. How much cement, how much water do you need? And then this new surface, which can either be asphalt or concrete, can be placed directly on top. But this is kind of the steps of using that full depth reclamation process. This is just a typical diagram. Again, this isn't Georgia. This is GA, meaning Georgia, meaning General Aviation Runway. This is just a typical section that I see as this technique's being used. And I guess the questions that I commonly get with these kind of jobs is, how important are these edge drains? They add costs, right? We know these pavements are being affected with water. How important are these for I would say, if it's an airport like New York, these are pretty doggone important. For Atlanta Hartsfield, it's pretty doggone important. For a general aviation airport, is there enough value is the question. That's a good research topic right there, Peter. Because we're seeing questions from the consultant community saying, sometimes that these edge drains can be 10% of my job costs for these small airports. So it's always cost versus benefit. And then the other big question we commonly get is, how strong is too strong for that new reclaimed base? Everyone wants to add more cement, thinking, okay, let's build the best base, the strongest base we can. That's not the best, is it? What happens is, if you build it too strong, this base cracks, and especially if you top it with an asphalt pavement that has a lower modulus of elasticity, every crack that forms in this base right here reflects up through it, right? So that's one of the benefits of topping it with concrete, is that we don't have to worry about the strength quite near as much. But when most of these jobs that are being topped with asphalt, you really do need to control the strength of that base. And that's why I said it can be too strong. We're seeing some airports wishing to use crack relief layers between this base and that surface, which is good. It adds value, it adds safety. But again, there's cost to this. And by the time you put in your edge drains, put in crack relief layers, again, you're just increasing your cost of your projects that may be warranted, but it's something to think about. So here is a case study at Elizabeth City where we not only reclaimed the base and the old asphalt pavement was removed and reclaimed, but and you can see here, it's already been, the cement has been, the FDR has already been placed on top. This is the prime coat that's placed usually on top of that. And then for this particular job, we actually placed the PO501, which is again the concrete layer, about 9 inches of concrete for this GA airport in Eastern North Carolina. So what's another strategy? I'll be shocked, Peter, when you develop that one research one about how to do fast track. How do you fast track projects? If you don't get at least half the projects being concrete overlays, I'll be totally shocked, because if you want to do something fast, you want to use a concrete overlay. And the reason why, anytime you get down in the subgrade, what's happening? You're exposing the subgrade to the weather elements, right? That's a project delay. So anytime, I always talk to consultants, evaluate a concrete overlay first. If you have to eliminate it because you can't tie to it, if there's other reasons why a concrete overlay can't be used, I understand, but make sure you evaluate it, because it will be the fastest. It will be a very cost-effective solution. And what it does for you as far as resiliency is two things. A, it increases the structural strength of that, but B, it also increases the height. It gets that pavement off the water table that's rising. So it's less impactful in the future. And again, the concrete overlay market is a growing market for our industry. I think it was 20 years ago, we were only doing about 2% of our volume of our concrete paving was being done with concrete overlays. Today, it's 12% of our market. So it's a growing portion of our market, and it's an important one. The two that I see being used by airports, I very, very seldom see bonded overlays. So I'm not even going to talk about bonded overlays. It is part of the design circular, but you got to get special permission. These are the two that I see. Unbonded, placing the concrete directly on top of the asphalt, and then placing the concrete directly on top of the concrete with, the key part is that separation layer to make sure that any underlying distress in that old concrete pavement doesn't reflect up. That separation layer today can either be an asphalt material, which is most common, but we're also seeing more geosynthetic materials, fabrics. So again, ACPA, the National Association of Concrete Pavement, we're profiling these kind of projects more and more, because we know it's the future of our industry, because we're cost effective, because they're resilient overlays. This project here is in if anyone's ever been to Myrtle Beach, the Grand Strand area, this is a concrete overlay, 7 inches of concrete placed on top of the old asphalt pavement. You can see the inland waterway here. Out here's the ocean where hurricanes occur. And so now this airport has a very resilient pavement, a very resilient overlay. It's not only meant for small GA airports, though. I think you'll hear in a little bit how JFK utilized a concrete overlay to develop a 50-year design. So in South Carolina, again, where I'm responsible, we're seeing more and more of our local airports use concrete solutions. In fact, about 28% of our GA 51 airports, GA airports in the state, and again, all the GAs are where concrete's been used are identified by the blue pegs. The white pegs are commercial airports that have used concrete. Most of every commercial airport in the state has used some concrete, but it's these GA airports that we're seeing more and more utilize concrete solutions because of their added resiliency and their durability, obviously. We're doing open houses on some of these projects just to help consultants and designers understand. This was one in Lancaster, another one down in Charleston. So let me just describe what happened down in Charleston where they did the unbonded overlay. And these are quotes from the owner that said what the concrete overlay did. Again, it kept us out of the subgrade. Anytime you can stay away from the subgrade, you're speeding up construction. Anytime you're raising the pavement elevation, when you have that ability to do that, you're getting off of that high water table. You're improving the resilience. So the old concrete that was there, this old concrete that was here was 60 years old. It dated back to World War II. And he believes that the new surface will also be a 60-year design. As I mentioned at the beginning, the PCIs, this is the important part, showing how PCIs, the pavement condition index, the concrete versus the asphalt, a study that was done by FAA in 2014 kind of shared a range of PCI deterioration. As you can see, for concrete at JCI, we're still within that range. With asphalt, again, where you have those high water tables, you're seeing it exceed the normal deterioration, 50% faster. And again, I contributed that to the high water tables. And so that's, again, helps illustrate why resiliency and water inundation matters. It's happening throughout our country. As I mentioned, it's not just the coastal area that's dealing with flooding, but many airports in Iowa has had similar experiences. They've used concrete overlays there far many years before we even started our overlay program. This one is in Fort Madison. And this slide illustrates some of these airports that have been done with white topping. Again, this is how old at the last investigation of the PCI, this is how old these pavements were. And you can see the PCIs on some of these older pavements. Again, the FAA only uses a 20-year design life. We're already at 22 years, and our PCI at this airport right here is like a 97. We're out here at 26 years, and our pavement is still like a 94. So these conditions at these airports that have received these concrete overlays are standing up very well. I found this one as a testimony of how we're paying more attention to resilience. Here's the water. This overlay was done in 2011 on an old 70-year-old concrete pavement that had received asphalt in the past. Now they wanted a longer life solution. So they evaluated reconstruction. They evaluated putting another asphalt overlay on it or a concrete overlay. They chose the 8 inches of concrete because they felt like it was more resilient, where they have a high water table that in the past had dealt with the added to the stress. So some of the things they did to help and improve that design, they used dowel bars at every joint. Mark knows that the FAA doesn't typically require every single joint, every single transverse joint on this kind of airport to be doweled. For this particular airport, they did. But still, by using a concrete overlay solution, they were 1/2 the cost if they had gone in there, torn out the entire pavement structure and put it back. So there's another case there, Peter, a perfect, great case study that says, if you want to do something fast, consider a concrete overlay versus reconstructing it. And look at today, 10 years later, the PCI on that is still a 98 out of 100. So it's holding up very well. I had to show this one since Mark's moderating this one. I found this on their website, but they talk about the resiliency of concrete, and y'all can read that for yourself. But it illustrates with concrete, they feel like they'll have a 40-year life versus an 8 to 12-year life with asphalt. So I use that slide. This was a press release by them back in 2019. So in conclusion, airfield pavements are being negatively impacted by our changing climate. They're going to continue to be impacted. We're going to have to use both green and gray solutions. What I shared with you, obviously, were the gray solutions, but there are green solutions that are being talked about more and more to help improve our nation's infrastructure. So these are the things we've got to consider doing. These are the things that we need to take into account, requiring pavement designs based upon a lower subgrade strength. The FAA encourages that already, but we need to continue to push that and consider that. And stiffen the system is one of the key things. If you want to build resiliency, if you want to improve your resiliency, stiffen your system. And there's low-cost solutions such as stabilization techniques as well as concrete overlays that can be used to do that.